This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
He was very uncomfortable. I winced. I mean, it was wincing. It was really, really wincing to watch. You're watching one of those indelible moments in sports where it is a live train wreck. Oh man, this is only going to get worse.
Well, we're recapping last night's documentary, another ESPN special, as we're still in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Not many sports on. Documentaries are all the rage. And backstory, The Decision, aired on Sunday night, and we're talking about it tonight here on Distant Replay Podcast. I'm Ben George. He's Mike Noto. Mike, did you enjoy the doc?
I did. I like docs where I learn more than I knew about a certain situation or game or moment, and this definitely delivered on that.
Yeah, it did. And we're going to go through all of it. We're going to talk about really how the decision came about, why ESPN decided to carry the decision, give LeBron and his team an hour, how the decision played out, what it looked like on TV. Most of us have seen it. I'm sure you've seen it, but looking back on that process and just how unorganized it was, and then the fallout from the special, how it changed the NBA, how it changed LeBron's career, how it changed kind of the athlete itself and the relationship with the media. So pretty big deal, pretty big event, and a 1 hour documentary. We're going to talk about it all on this episode of Distant Replay. Again, really remind you, you can find us online at distantreplaypodcast.com. Every past episode, a link to watch the documentary, plus every game we watch, you can get the link there on the website as well. You can find us on YouTube. Thanks to all of our new subscribers there on the channel, and also on Twitter, Distant Podcast. So let's jump into this documentary. Again, backstory, The Decision, on LeBron James's TV special 10 years ago, July 8th, 2010. Mike, do you remember where you were when this decision went down?
I honestly do not remember where I was, but I remember watching it.
Okay. I'm going to take you back, and I can't believe you don't remember this, because this thing aired about an hour or two before your bachelor party began.
Oh, wow.
Do you remember now?
That's probably why I didn't remember.
Yeah, it was happening that night, and then we went down to the coast and enjoyed your bachelor party starting that night and then through the weekend. So I remember, because I think I was maybe doing something with ESPN that evening or that day of work leading up to that. So I probably was really kind of keyed into the decision at that point. And then, of course, being sports fans, we're all kind of following. And you being a Knicks fan, I'm sure you thought maybe there's a chance of this happening when the decision was made.
Up until the day of, I did.
Okay.
I mean, we'll get into this, but by the time he's actually making his decision, I think everyone knew where he was going.
Well, this documentary goes back and just kind of looks back at how this whole thing came about. Just kind of gives you the backstory, as the name tells you, about the decision from Don Van Natta Jr., the journalist who kind of covered this event and spent the last year interviewing people involved to kind of get a complete picture of how this all happened. So let's start with the idea and how it began. I don't know that it's been really talked about a whole lot or was really in mainstream, but the fact that a fan proposed this idea to Bill Simmons' mailbag, which probably took you back a little bit to Bill Simmons' mailbag back when he was writing with ESPN, but threw the idea out, and Bill Simmons took it and ran with it and took it to the NBA, took it to LeBron's people, took it to ESPN, and really got this thing off the ground.
Yeah, it all started, like you said, in that mailbag. Those mailbags were great. Unfortunately, I think Mr. Simmons has changed a little bit since then, and I don't enjoy him quite as much as I used to. I think he has a different style now, but I think he's one of those rare guys that was better with the written word than the spoken word, which is definitely rare this day and age. But yeah, those mailbags were great. And it started as an idea in that mailbag and then sort of grew from there. I don't think, they didn't latch onto it right away, but you had another party of people who would then bring it up again to LeBron and his representatives.
Yeah, I'll give Bill Simmons credit. I mean, whether you like him or not, and I know people in Boston love him. Outside of that, you can kind of take him or leave him in some cases. But he's been really good about creating content and thinking outside of the box when it comes to sports and when it comes to media. And this thing is kind of a part of it. I mean, that's why ESPN brought him on. is because of this way of thinking. I mean, it wasn't his idea originally, but the fact that he thought this really had potential and really pushed for it. I mean, this is something that easily could have fallen through the wayside or fallen through the cracks in a mailbag. Oh yeah, that's a great idea. It makes it great for a great conversation, or I might even write a column about it. But to actually act on it and try to make that come to fruition, that's kind of what Bill Simmons has been all about and why he's built such a great career.
Yeah, he's a sports guy, right?
Yeah.
So he was taking he took the time to read the emails he got, make this mailbag segment. It really, really caught on during that time period, and even before then, obviously. And this was something that, like you said, came directly out of that mailbag and led to ESPN's highest rated studio show ever.
Yeah, pretty crazy, right? Well, it's funny because, in this process, this documentary, and again, David Stern now has appeared on a few documentaries this year, which is pretty amazing that they were able to get this much time with him before he passed on January the 1st. But I thought it was interesting that he tried to tell ESPN not to do it. That was his big thing was, I try to push ESPN, do not do this.
Yeah, he was, as a commissioner, he was sort of all about the opposite of what LeBron and his representatives were all about, right? David Stern wanted him and the league to control the narrative, and LeBron and his reps wanted to start, what now is called the player empowerment era, but back then was, hey, LeBron wants to tell his own story the way he wants to tell it. And that's just not the way David Stern ran the league. And this is at a time where David Stern was at the tail end as commissioner. And I'm not saying he lost touch because he was a great commissioner, but you saw the difference in the generations with his reaction to LeBron wanting to do this.
Yeah, he was definitely old school in that regard. And, you can't fault him for that. He did a great job as commissioner. But, yeah, I mean, this is kind of a new age way of thinking, and he's protecting the brand and protecting what he had built and what his job was to protect. And that's part of the reason why he didn't want this to get off the ground and happen. But it did. And from ESPN's perspective, it was very good for them to get John Skipper's input. He was overseeing ESPN for a little while. That fell apart a few years ago. He left. Now I think he's with this. I don't even know how you say it. DAZN.
DAZN. Come on now.
It always confuses me when I see it. But DAZN, now he's with them. But he sat down and took the time out to talk about this, which I'm glad he did because he's the guy you'd want to hear from ESPN's perspective. They got a couple different executives' perspectives on this, and I thought that was really good. But Skipper ultimately is going to be the guy that was probably making that decision at the time. And he talked about it. I mean, we had to give up an hour of our time, in primetime programming to get this on our network. And we donated the ad dollars to the charity that LeBron wanted and made that happen. But you saw the result, as you mentioned, the top-rated studio show they had. And I don't think ESPN would do it any differently, except maybe let's get a little bit more control about the on-air product. I think that was the biggest deal was, yeah, we'll let you have as much control of this as you want. We'll let you do it your way. But now I think they would have just liked to rein it in a little bit and have a little bit of editorial control over what happened. If nothing else, just to make the actual show good.
Yeah, like you're getting to, the production was absolutely terrible. I mean, just everything. And anyone who thinks putting on a TV production is easy should go back and watch this documentary, or better yet, go back and watch the actual decision, the hour-long special, because it was an exercise in how not to do things from a television show perspective. And again, I think it was a process of LeBron and his representatives learning a lot of big lessons, throughout this decision. And this was probably the major one. Let the professionals, the TV professionals, put on the television production.
Yeah, and I think that, guys now, there's a lot more of a collaboration at this point when these things happen. I think there's more trust on both sides. LeBron wanted to control this. He wanted to have full control, his people have full control over this, and they got it. But a couple things they could have done differently. First off, the host. I mean, I think, Jim Gray had no association with ESPN, but that's who LeBron chose. I think ESPN, as they talked about, wanted either Bob Lee to do it. They wanted either Stuart Scott to maybe be a part of that. Mike Tirico was around at the time at ESPN. All guys that could have done a better job than Jim Gray.
You just named three guys off the top of your head. I think there's even a roster even longer than that. What about Stephen A. Smith? How awesome would that have been?
Yeah.
I think that would have been great to have someone like him. Again, there's just and we mentioned his name before. I think even Bill Simmons would have been better than Jim Gray.
Yeah, could have been. Yeah, that's a good point. So I think that was one of the spots where they would have liked to have a little more control. But yeah, I thought I really enjoyed watching the kind of the behind the scenes off camera, LeBron being uncomfortable, not really knowing what he was going to say. I find it shocking, and I don't know what they were all expecting going into this, but to not kind of have everything laid out in terms of what you want to say. I know he was early in his career, but still maybe the biggest name in the NBA, certainly top 3. You'd think he would have his ducks in a row, but they had no organization, no preparation for what they were going to say when they got on the air.
Yeah, especially since before the show, they were at a house in Greenwich together with Jim Gray, and they still didn't go over anything. There was no game plan whatsoever.
It's amazing.
LeBron went in there completely cold to do an hour of TV with sitting across from one other guy, and there was no plan whatsoever. I couldn't believe that when they said it.
And I forgot how uncomfortable it was, but Jim Gray is trying to get anything out of LeBron. And even LeBron didn't even really give him a whole lot to this, didn't play along. You think
LeBron was nervous, man. LeBron was nervous.
Yeah, you can see that for sure. But I figured he'd be a little bit more, I'm just going to go with this. This is my production. Have fun with it. I know it's a big deal, and I know he was nervous about what he was about to announce. But still, I still couldn't believe it. And I thought it was funny, too, when Jim Gray got the questions from Maverick Carter afterwards, when the show was over, he wanted to record some listener questions or fan questions for the website, which, look, I give Maverick Carter credit. I mean, that's the way he needed to be thinking, right? Extra content, bonus content for the fans. But Jim Gray was looking at some of those questions like, how did the weather affect your decision to play in Miami? And as a like TV personality, journalist, interviewer, he was just like, are you serious with this? Am I really playing a part in this right now?
Yeah, he's like, you really want me to ask this? I think he said that verbatim to Maverick Carter.
Are you screwing me right now?
And this has come from a guy, Jim Gray, who during the live interview, right before LeBron announced the decision, I think the last question he asked was, are you still a nail biter? That was a question that he asked.
Oh, man, the hard-hitting questions they were asking.
And Jim Gray always finds his way in these moments.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It's like Brent Musburger and Vern Lundquist in all the games that we watch. Like, they always happen to be in these games, in these big moments, and that's the same case with Jim Gray.
Jim Gray, I mean, like we went over, this guy doesn't even I know that, I think Jim Gray was close to the people that pitched the idea to LeBron's team that eventually got them to, interested in doing it. Maybe that was the connection, but of all people, Jim Gray always ends up in these moments.
Yeah, pretty crazy. I also thought it was funny that Kanye West was at this house in Greenwich eating this dinner with LeBron and his posse beforehand. Did you know that? Is that something I just overlooked completely, or is this something that we found out on this documentary?
I found it on a documentary, and I didn't know. I mean, are they friends? Are they known to be close? I have no idea. It's a pretty big moment for him to be in attendance for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You think only his closest of friends would be with him eating dinner an hour before he made the most important decision of his basketball life, Yeah,
was he in New York and decided, let me just ride up, take a train for an hour or get a car service for an hour and go see LeBron, or did he actually come out for this specifically? I don't know. I've got a lot of questions on the Kanye aspect of that, but we'll never know that. The other thing from the show that I thought was odd is that I didn't remember, not really odd, but that I didn't remember, how heavy vitamin water was involved in this. That product was everywhere. It was, you had the Boys and Girls Club was like number one, and then it was like vitamin water. It was like everywhere in this production. Did you notice that?
Yeah. Didn't they have bottles, individual team vitamin water bottles for like the different teams he was considering going to?
Yeah. Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. All right. So the decision happens, right? Chris Broussard had a lot of input on this too, on this whole process and kind of what LeBron's inner workings, what they were thinking about this, and kind of the pulse of this decision as it was happening. And look, LeBron, I thought it was first interesting that Broussard talked about, hey, look, LeBron came in talking about not chasing rings when he first started, and that kind of led to where he got in this moment, chooses Miami, sets up this powerhouse roster with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, free agents, Chris Bosh, and it kind of changed the game. But I thought of Chris Broussard, talked about he wasn't comfortable. Like even flying when they left there, he kind of still had doubts on the decision he had made until Dan Gilbert opened his mouth and posted a letter on their website.
That letter, I mean, will live in infamy. And if there was any way LeBron was going to maybe change his mind on the plane ride down there, I mean, I think they said it in the documentary. Him and his team read that on their way down there. And after they read that, there was no way they were going back to Cleveland in that moment. And I thought Shelley Smith had one of the best lines in the documentary where they had to confirm whether it was really from Dan Gilbert or not.
Yeah, that was great.
Because if you look at the letter, though, it's like someone who just learned how to use Microsoft Word like a week ago and was fooling around with the templates or something and didn't really know exactly how to get their point across. And this is a guy who was a billionaire at this point. So that Dan Gilbert letter was the icing on the cake. And, LeBron in this moment, he tells Broussard in 2006 he's not going to chase rings. But I just think what happened in 2009 when they were favored to beat the Magic and they lost, that Dwight Howard Magic team that went on to lose to the Lakers in the finals. And then in 2010, the disappointing playoff loss to the Celtics. I don't blame LeBron. I don't blame LeBron for wanting to leave.
Yeah. Because
that front office had 7 years to put a team around him, and they just failed to do so flat out. And Dan Gilbert was a part of that, so maybe a little more self-awareness on Dan Gilbert's part. It was one of those letters where the people in Cleveland were going to love it, but no one else was.
Right. And I give LeBron credit for kind of being a bigger man when it all was said and done and came back to Cleveland and helped them win, because that's something you just don't forget about. I mean, forget about the way the fans treated him when he left. And I understand, as much as he talked about wanting to be there for Cleveland and bring championships to Cleveland, and then had this whole episode, which didn't come off well, especially in the moment with him on top of everything else. It kind of just, I understand where the fans were coming from, but yeah, to have Dan Gilbert do that was a completely different level. But LeBron, he overlooked it later on. But so when this happens, fallout, behind this, obviously it changed the landscape of the NBA, I think, is one of the biggest things, right? I mean, this was the first big moment where everything shifted, and now we have this kind of roster, construction that involves a lot of these guys working together.
Yeah, it was the first time, and they said in the documentary, and it was put perfectly, that a really good team was built in an unnatural way. You had guys, typically in the past, the way teams were built was by the draft, right? Or strategic trades, right? Those typically the two ways teams were built. This is a team that was built, it seemed as though that Bosh, LeBron, and Wade both took the same amount of year extension in 2006 for a little bit less money. So they hit free agency at the same time. Bosh commits to going to Miami the day before the decision here. And I find it almost impossible to believe that Bosh and Wade didn't have assurances that he was going to go there. And this super team is built. And I don't know if you remember the first year they were together when they would lose to Dallas in the finals, the Dirk Nowitzki Dallas team, how much pressure was on them at that point. I mean, people were celebrating that in a way I've never seen people celebrate a team losing before.
Yeah, but it was self-inflicted. I mean, with the way LeBron talked about winning, I don't even know what number he stopped on, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 championships. I mean,
that was worse than the decision, in my opinion, by the way.
Yeah.
That whole pep rally they had shortly after they all signed there, I mean, that was more cringeworthy to me than a decision. It's like, because he knew at that point, he was already starting to be well aware of the fallout from the decision, and he still went forward with that.
Yeah, it was cringeworthy for a different reason. It was like, no awareness there versus the decision TV episode was just awkward, poor quality, just not well constructed. So it was like two different cringeworthiness episodes for LeBron. But, the other big part of this, in retrospect, this is a bigger deal, I think, than what we made it in the moment. In the moment, it was about a superstar player seeming selfish and being above the game and hogging the limelight to make a decision that everybody makes every year, just about. But now in retrospect, I mean, this is a pretty big moment in terms of media and that relationship with the players. And, it changed the way that players view their worth, view their power, view the control they have over their lives. And the narrative is, that was a big part of this show, is talking about controlling the narrative. But it's true. I mean, since that time, we've seen, the Players Tribune start up, and we've seen these guys with the rise of social media too, it's given them that power to have their own platform. Now everybody can do it. You don't need ESPN's hour of TV. You can take it in your own way and put it on YouTube or put it on Instagram or TikTok if you're on TikTok, whatever. But it kind of started that, like, hey, sure, it took the guy with, maybe the most power in the game to do it, but it opened the door for everybody else. And it also changed the trajectory of LeBron's career, where it wasn't as much about basketball. It's also part of his off the court, both as a kind of a leader for a lot of the rights that he fights for and the beliefs that he has, but also his production, his media group that they have now formed and have created productions. And now he's moved out to LA. You can kind of see how that all kind of flows now, if you look back on it, to see how this kind of path played its way out. But in retrospect, it was a huge deal. I mean, I don't think we've made as much about it until we've actually had this documentary and kind of put it all together. But man, that was a pretty big deal in that regard.
Yeah, that's the lasting legacy of the decision, in my opinion, because you have LeBron and his childhood friends, Maverick Carter, Rich Paul, and Randy Mims, right? This is their first foray in controlling the narrative, like we mentioned. It didn't go good, right? By all accounts, it did not go good. LeBron at that moment could have totally reversed course and questioned putting these guys in charge of such an important part of his future, right? But he did the exact opposite. I mean, he doubled down on these guys. He put them in more situations and more roles to succeed. They went through how, Maverick Carter got experience, negotiating deals, working for a certain company. Rich Paul went and worked for an agency and now is one of the biggest agents in the NBA. LeBron didn't give up on these guys. And throughout the course of time here, they developed into this media powerhouse, like you mentioned. And it's led to, there's so many other athletes now that start their own media companies. And that wasn't even a thought before LeBron and a decision sort of opened everyone's eyes to that. Because while the world said, wow, what a bad decision that was to go on and, just rip Cleveland's hearts out like that, there was a lot of players who sat up and said, wow, that's awesome. Yeah. He's getting to write his own story.
Yep. And we'll always look back at that special for that reason. And you're right. That's the lasting legacy from this decision. I think it aged really well, maybe.
Yeah. Isn't there something to be said for a guy that, is as big a stakes as LeBron has with his career, that this didn't go good and he didn't give up on his friends? That says a lot.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, very much so. And just the vision, whether it was accidental or not, whether it came from a fan and the idea originally came from Bill Simmons, bringing it to everybody, these guys took it and ran with it and made it a part of their brand and LeBron's legacy. And it's a huge deal when you look back on it. So pretty cool to look back on this 10 years later, 10 years almost to the day as this episode is being recorded and published. And 10 years, Mike, from your bachelor party, pal.
Yeah,
even
10 years from my bachelor. I did think he was going to. I needed to see for myself that he was going to go on national TV and stick it to Cleveland like that.
Yeah.
That was the most surprising part of this. And removed from it, I think we forget that. And he's going to Miami at the time, which had some good teams, not really championship level teams. But, you still probably think of Miami is not really that great of a sports city. And to think that back then he was going to pass on New York, Chicago, or going back to Cleveland, you sort of needed to see it happen before you believed it. Mm-hmm. I think that's an aspect of this that was very real at the time.
Let's wrap it up on that note, Mike. Another good documentary in the books, backstory, the decision on ESPN. We'll have more of these as we move forward. Our next game will also be the 1997 Rose Bowl, a listener recommendation. We're going to do that on their account and check it out and watch that. And our next episode will cover that look back at that game. So we'll close it out. Remember, find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com, on Twitter at Distant Podcast, also on our YouTube channel. Leave us a comment. Recommend any games that you think we should go back and watch. We'd appreciate it. So, Mike, enjoyed this episode. Enjoyed this documentary. As you mentioned, did learn something from it. So I did think there was some value in this one. And it was a quick 1 hour, well put together, kind of kept the show moving. All in all, I thought it was a very good production.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. Eye-opening, and looking forward to next week and covering some Jake the Snake Plummer.
There it is. We'll talk to you next episode of the Distant Replay Podcast. We appreciate you listening.